Four Oaks, success isn't just a goal, it's the essence of our vision to expect success. From our community-based services, including in-home support and after-school programs, to our residential treatment programs and foster care services, Four Oaks touches the lives of children and families in all 99 counties. With your commitment, we will continue to support our communities across the state for many, many years to come. Thank you so much for your support.
Hey everyone, welcome to Iowa Ideas. You're joining us in the 9th year of Iowa Ideas. It's an event that explores topics that are important to Iowans, and we are so excited for these great 2 days of discussion on the pressing issues facing Iowans. Before we get rolling, a couple really important thank yous to pass along. The Gazette wants to give a special thank you to our presenting sponsor, ITC Midwest, and also for Four Oaks Family and Children's Service, who you just heard from, for sponsoring this specific track on human and social services. We appreciate them both very much. Our sponsors' support helps make the Iowa Ideas discussions free for everyone, which is obviously important to us and critical. So we appreciate those sponsorships very much. Before we get rolling, also I wanted to remind those of you who have joined us and are listening in that we got a little bit of an interactive feature here too. You can submit questions to our panel today if you'd like to by entering them into the Q&A box or in the Zoom chat. And if you do that, we will do our best to work them into the conversation. So you got four wonderful people here who know a lot about this and have some great insights into their field and this discussion. And if I don't have all the best questions, so if you think of something that you haven't heard today, please feel free to drop that in the chat. And again, we'll do our best to get to those throughout the day. So that topic today, we're going to be discussing mobilizing when you feel minimized, nonprofit advocacy, and how it is affecting Iowa. And we have some wonderful nonprofit leaders from throughout the state here to talk to us. I'm Aaron Murphy. I am the Gazette's Des Moines Bureau Chief. And today I'm joined by, as I said, a wonderful group of panelists. So let's get right to it and meet those panelists and learn more about their role and where their expertise in this discussion comes from today. And we're just going to go right around the horn to get us started here. Kristen Roberts, will start with you. Tell us about yourself, your organization, and the work you do.
Yeah, thanks so much, Aaron, and thank you to the Gazette for hosting this panel today. It's a great topic for us to talk about. I'm Kristen Roberts. I'm president and CEO of United Way of East Central Iowa. We are based out of Cedar Rapids, Iowa. We are a 5-county United Way, so we cover Iowa, Benton, Jones, Cedar, and Linn counties is what we cover. I started in 2020, so it was a great time to start. There's just a little bit going on once I started in February between March with COVID and the Dray Show that hit our area in August. But it's been a good place to be. What United Way does is we really look at what the needs are within the community. We help identify what those top needs are. And then what we look to do is really bring others together around what those needs are. We figure out who are the top key stakeholders, who are the people who are touched by it. How can we all come together, really look at the challenging situations? How can we figure out what barriers are in our way? How can we break those barriers down? How can we brainstorm new ideas? And our nonprofit partners are on the ground doing the work, and we're really trying to look at how we can move that system forward and how we can co-create solutions together. So a lot of people think of United Way and they think about us with our partner agencies, and they're looking at how we can maybe figure out and help someone within the next 24 hours, 24 days, whatever it is. United Way is really there trying to look at how can we move the system forward for the next 24 years. So just really looking at that systems level change. We focus on youth opportunity, healthy community, financial security, and community resiliency are the 4 areas that we focus on.
Very good. Excellent. Thank you, Kristen. Next, let's go to Getzy Hernandez. Getzy, tell us about yourself and your organization.
Yeah, so hi everyone. Thanks for having me. My name is Getzy Hernandez, and I'm an organizer with Escucha Mi Voz Iowa. We're based in Iowa City. Our nonprofit serves and works directly with the immigrant community and as well as immigrant workers. And we provide services such as protective accompaniment, ICE check-ins, legal aid referrals for their lawyers. We do English classes every Monday, and we also do Know Your Rights trainings and workshops for people. And we also do a lot of other one-on-one services, such as interpretation, filing paperwork, transportation, things like that. But that's what we do a lot of things with the immigrant community, but that's kind of like the bulk of what we do.
Yeah. Thank you, Getsy. All right. Moving through our lineup here. Lois, tell us about yourself and your organization.
Great. I'm Lois Bunce, and I have my own consulting business, Lois Bunce Consulting, or LBC. My background is working in nonprofits. I was the CEO at United Way before Kristen was there, and other nonprofits in the region, as well as teaching at the University of Iowa and Clark University. Now in my role as a consultant, I help nonprofits primarily in fundraising and fund development strategies, but also do strategic planning and board development. Certainly in my career, spent a lot of time working on the advocacy for the services that my organizations delivered in the community. And now what I do is really help people strategize on how can they align donors, particularly with the needs that they have in their organization, and how do they address some of the challenges we're having in this kind of chaotic environment we're living in.
All right, very good. Thank you, Lois. It's funny, right off the top, I moderated a sort of tangentially similar panel this morning, and chaos was one of the words I heard a lot in that one too. So it's interesting right off the bat to hear that from you here. Thank you, Lois. And finally, Emily Shields, tell us about yourself and your organization.
Yep. Well, I'll be participating in Iowa Ideas with a couple of different hats this year, but today I'm representing the Iowa Nonprofit Alliance. I'm the board vice president. We are still a relatively new organization in Iowa and working to make it possible for nonprofits to achieve more. We're Iowa's only statewide nonprofit association. Most states have had nonprofit associations for many years, if not decades, and that's still relatively new in Iowa. So we are working on how to support and connect nonprofits across the state, as well as advocate for our really critical role in the state's success.
All right. Excellent. I appreciate that, Emily. And again, appreciate you all being willing to join us. I'm looking forward to this because we got such a great group of people who are on the ground level for all the topics we're going to talk about. So again, keeping in mind the topic here, mobilizing when you feel minimized, nonprofit advocacy, and how's it affecting Iowa. I'll be honest, as I put together a script, it maybe leaned a little bit into my background as a state house reporter and what I see going on my beat. And so I wanted to start with, I was curious from a big picture level, and I'll open this up to whoever wants to start here. How does a nonprofit organization not only conduct its mission, but also advocate for its mission and services without being seen as politically partisan at a time when that's obviously something that all of us have to navigate in one way or the other, I think. And is that a difficult distinction to be made when you're talking about advocating and not coming off as partisan? Maybe actually, if you don't mind, Getsy, can I ask you that one first? Because obviously your group is on the front lines for a question like this, and I'd be curious to hear from you.
Yeah, so I think that for us, since we are working directly with the immigrant population, we are very person-centered and we focus solely on the services and the community needs, like the immediate community needs in that moment. So it's really easy for some people on the outside to think that, we are politically affiliated in a certain way or another. But in reality, we work with a lot of different politically affiliated people, and it's difficult to navigate at times. But of course, I mean, politics affect the communities we work with. So we just try to focus on having those services for the people and having it remain person-centered because they are who we are working with.
I'll jump in. United Way is an apolitical organization. And so this is one of the things in which, just like Getsy said, we work with everyone. We know that what is being, whether it's laws being changed or different policies that are being passed, we know that we are going to have to work within whatever those changes are. And so we want to make sure that we just have good relationships with people along the way, because there will always be tides and waves that transition when it comes to politics. But when it comes down to it, I think, Getsy, you kind of talked about it, the people that you're working with can be among a continuum of all kind, and they just truly may have a love for one issue, or they may have a love for your organization, and you just have to be able to find what that is and be able to connect with them on that.
I think it's also important to just reflect what the facts are in the community. And, as you said, Kristen and United Way does a great job of collecting needs and doing needs assessments. So we have a picture of what are the needs, what are the gaps in the community, what are also the challenges we have. And so I think when we talk about the work that we do, trying to present that as neutral as possible and let people make their own decision about it. Obviously, there are certain laws or policies that we like to advocate for, but it's really up to the public, I think, to decide when they hear the information, what do they think about it, and do they want more information about it?
Yeah, and this is actually a really important topic in our country right now. Nonprofits are legally not allowed to advocate in a partisan way for political candidates because of something called the Johnson Amendment. There have been calls to repeal that amendment in recent years, and a court case this summer that created some narrow exceptions. And so it's a really important time to talk about whether it is important for particularly tax-exempt nonprofits to stay out of partisan politics. I personally think it is. But that seems to be in question, and something that our organization is involved in advocating for keeping, I guess I should say. One thing I would add, though, is that it is not partisan or political to advocate, and that is a really important role for nonprofits to engage with, whether it's advocating for their communities or even advocating to agree that is specifically lobbying. Nonprofits are allowed to lobby on issues that affect their organizations or their constituencies. There are some limitations to that and how much time the organization can use on that depending on their status, but we do think it's a really important role for organizations to be involved with, especially right now when so many changes at the political level are impacting the people we serve.
Yeah, and that leads me really well, Emily. So maybe I'll start with you on this one. Into my next question was very tangential, but so that's kind of a big picture view. When organizations are working with policymakers, whether it's to discuss a potential policy that's coming down the pipeline or a funding that might impact a group, what is the sort of best industry practice? What have you learned about communicating with those policymakers? And again, trying to break through, as you all just described, this, making clear that the mission is the mission and it's people centered, and this is why we do what we do, and making clear that it's not about politics.
Yeah, I think the best thing for nonprofits to do is stick to what they know best, which is the facts and stories of the folks that they're serving. So, it's not even necessary a lot of the time for nonprofits to advocate for a specific position. It can help the conversation just for them to share facts about food insecurity or whatever issue they may be sharing, and in particular, the stories of the people that they work with. I think that's the piece we often hear from legislators and other policymakers that moves the needle the most, is just understanding what's really happening on the ground and what that looks like. And nonprofits are really well positioned to have that information.
One thing I remember that we've talked about in the United Way Network is the idea as to the policies or the laws may have been changed. And our role is to help those who have made those changes understand the new barriers that are going to be coming forward. And then, like you talked about, Emily, what are the data points and the stories? Because some people love data, some people love stories. You got to give a value to both of them. But that's our role, is to help educate them. They're not in the everyday, right, footsteps working the ground like those of us in the nonprofit are. And so they trust us in being able to provide that accurate information. When you think about, social media and AI and all of the things and all of the stories and videos that are created, being that trusted partner and being able to have that communication with them, not just when something changes, but year round, allows you to be that trusted partner for when things come up. And you say, hey, if you would vote this, these are the things that are going to happen. If you vote this, these are the other things that would happen. And being able to help give them that information is really important.
Yeah, I think you mentioned, Kristen, that that having that ongoing communication and relationship with people is really critical, and I think that's the core of it. Is when we work with policymakers, establishing relationships with them is critical. So that they know you, they know what information you can provide, and then I think the other thing I'd say is, try to be as clear and succinct as possible. Sometimes the issues we work with are very, very complex. They're hard to describe, they're hard to explain. And so being able to get it down to that, one sheet of paper or the key data points so somebody can remember, what are the most important things I want to walk away from this conversation with, I think is really critical.
Well, I suppose that can be a challenging thing too, Lois, when you're passionate about something and you're an expert on it and you know a lot about it. I imagine that can be a challenging thing sometimes too, to make sure you whittle that down to the
right
bare essentials. Yeah, did you want to add anything or other before I move on?
Yeah, I think kind of going back to what Emily was saying, I think for our organization, we approach policymakers with testimonies and firsthand accounts of people that are directly affected by these laws or policies. So a lot of those impacts are shared from their voices and from their perspectives, and that makes it a lot more meaningful. And yeah, I think that's probably the most important part when it comes to those conversations.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and that I hear that a lot, being able to tell those personal stories. And I'll say, Kristen, it was also interesting to hear, but then also some people really like the data too. So you come armed with both. That's interesting. I don't want to belabor this really because so much that we can talk about. So I promise this is the last sort of politically tinged question, and then we'll move on. But again, because I know from covering my beat, government and politics, that our state and country's politics have become more polarized in recent years. And I'm just curious if anyone can speak to whether that's had an impact and effect on your organizations. And as we talk about having to work with, and I shouldn't put it that way, working with policy makers and having those discussions, have you found that more challenging in recent times as those politics, the people who are politically elected to office, has become more partisan? And welcome anyone who has a thought on that.
Well, it's definitely become more challenging. There's no question about that. I think what is very disappointing, frankly, is that we're at a point now where people won't even have a conversation. It's not a matter of having disagreements or challenges or different perspectives. It's if people won't even engage at all in hearing what you have to say. That's kind of the starting point of everything. And I think, unfortunately, we're at a point now where a lot of that is happening. I know organizations I've been with used to go to the State House and present to committee meetings and to give testimony, and some of that just isn't happening anymore because, unfortunately, we're not welcome. Some organizations aren't welcome. So.
Well, I agree that it has become more challenging, and I think particularly where it's the most challenging is online. I still find that face-to-face conversations often can be successful, and that if nonprofits work to build relationships with the representatives in their communities, they can still be successful in doing that, and that can cut through some of the sort of reactionary and partisan nature of what happens when discourse is online.
No. Okay. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Kristen.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think while it's become more challenging, I think it also causes us to sharpen our skills more, being able to have those conversations. And one of the examples I think back to is United Way is a big proponent of 211. That is the 911 for Health and Human Services. And one of the things that we talk about is when you talk to perhaps one side of the aisle, you may be talking about how you want to partner with the nonprofit agencies to provide efficiency and support. Well, you're going to talk to the other side of the aisle and say you want to partner with the nonprofits to connect community and key supports. You know, we want to reduce cost and solve problems quickly. We want to reduce costs by keeping people from falling through the cracks. We want to reduce the burden on law enforcement. We want to reduce the burden on law enforcement. And so having those skills sharpened and being able to understand how what you're advocating for does actually fit within the mission or the views of who you're speaking with, and being able to tailor that message to ways in which it appeals to them, I think is one of the ways that we can sharpen our skills.
Yeah, I definitely agree with everything that's been said. I think it's, as much as it's becoming challenging and difficult and even frustrating at times to have these conversations, I think it also makes it that much more important because, you know, we're going to continue to advocate for the communities that we work with.
Yeah, excellent. All right, I appreciate that. I wanted to move on now and ask you all about public funding and the way that supports and impacts your organizations. And I guess I should first ask to like, for example, Kristen and Getsy, how I establish how much public funding, whether it's direct funding or grants that your organizations typically sort of deploy. And then I'm curious if anybody has any examples of when there were sudden shifts in public funding. And let's be honest, when I say shifts, that more often than not means a reduction in funding, and how that impacted your organization. Maybe Kristen, I'll start with you. Tell us a little bit about United Way there.
Yeah, we have a small amount of federal grant funding that comes through us that helps us run our volunteer programs. While we were not affected by grant cuts, what happened was we were up for a renewal of the grant and we did not receive the renewal. So just a slight variation there. But I think probably the bigger thing is the partner agencies that we work with, seeing them have different cuts along the way. And one of the examples I can think about is we were funding one program and they received cuts and they came back to us and said, okay, so really, we can't put this money toward anything. How can you work with us? And one of the things that we really want to make sure is that we're flexible and being able to support. And there was a very similar program to what was originally funded that we were able to move those funds to be able to continue to support the organization and that need within the community. So I think the thing, if there are any funders out here listening, I think that's probably one of the things is just to continue to be flexible and understand that there may be changes that are not within the control of the nonprofit. And if I can put a plea out there, the more funders that are willing to support operational costs, salaries of people doing the work, the better. I mean, Getsy and her team cannot do what they do without the people. We can only support a building for so long, and it's the people who are really taking the work to the rest of the community.
Yeah, Getsy, how about, does the Escucha Mi Voz have any grant funding that supports what you all do, or is it all privately?
So our organization is pretty self-sustaining for the most part. So we don't rely on federal funding. Churches and individuals are actually what keeps our budget sustained. So we don't really experience shifts like that or like reductions in funding. But we do raise money by being a part of national organizing networks and such as NDWA, Endolon, Gamaliel. And they connect us to national immigrant movements, and they also provide us with training and re-granting opportunities So this allows us to not be fully dependent on federal funding, and our members are what sustain the organization.
Yeah, excellent.
Yeah.
And Emily, you represent all kinds of groups, right? Yeah.
Yeah, just big picture. I don't think a lot of people realize how much work in our communities is done by nonprofits. A lot of government work is actually carried out by nonprofit organizations that are either contracted or granted funds to achieve those outcomes. 1 in 10 Iowans are employed by a nonprofit organization. So federal funding, whether it's cuts or a shutdown like we're experiencing right now, absolutely impacts nonprofits and their ability to do their important work in all of our communities. We were just talking the other day about this, and a survey showed that when people are asked if they are served by nonprofits, many think they aren't, because we think of charitable, we think of things like that. But every time you go to the YMCA, you're being served by a nonprofit. Nonprofits are so integral to our communities, and they aren't all, meeting the needs of specific people who are living in poverty, although many are just making our communities the vibrant places where we want to live. And federal funding and state funding and local funding are all really key to the public-private partnerships that make that work.
Yeah, to that point, I'll add selfishly that I know from experience that if you've been to a community-based theater production of some kind, odds are you've been served by a nonprofit. Ask me more about that sometime offline if you'd like. Lois, go ahead, Kristen. Yep.
I was just going to add one more thing, and I know it was emphasized in the article you put out over the weekend, but if there is a thought that the nonprofits can fill the gap that the government has left, please remove that thought from your head. We do not have the capacity to do that, nor do we have the funding to be able to do that. And I think that is something that we just need to continue to share the message with, is if we think the nonprofits are going to step up and fill the gap that the federal government cuts have created, it's just not true, and it's not going to happen. We constantly are having to do more and more with less and less.
Yeah, that's a good point, because you will occasionally hear that, right? Someone will make the argument that it'd be better to get the government funding out of these things and let the nonprofits and the churches and the other charities handle that kind of stuff. And your view, Kristen, I'm guessing it's fairly widely shared to hear on the panel, is that's just far too big a lift to ask.
Yeah, I'm going to get the number wrong, but I think I've heard it's something like, if you used all of the nonprofits, all of the private foundations, et cetera, it's like 70 or 90 days or something like that to fill what the government funds.
Yeah.
And then we'd be out of money totally.
Yeah.
I think the other thing we're seeing too is just there are shifts in terms of corporate support has changed a great deal. Many of the corporations and communities have supported nonprofits, and they've changed a lot in terms of their support. So that's another, funding stream that has, it's not gone away, but it's definitely decreased over time.
Yeah, that's perfect, Lois. If you wouldn't mind, maybe I'll start with you. If you could expand on that, because I had made a note here. I wanted to remember to ask you all about that too, because we talk about, or I've asked about government funding, and the other side of that is the private donations as well. So I'm just kind of wondering what generally speaking, the atmosphere is for that right now, and whether it's strong or whether it's weak. And I'll also kind of provide an anecdotal thing from someone I talked to in one kind of corner of this space, and they said that there's sort of a reactionary surge in private donations right now, a real strong level of support, but they also worry how sustainable that is in the long term. So anyways, that's one thing I've heard, Lois, and then anybody else. What does the private donating world look like right now for nonprofits?
Yeah, well, I think the reality is that the private sector is not going to make up what we're losing in terms of government funding. But,
and I should be clear, I'm sorry, really quick, and that I mean whether it's corporate like you're talking about, or individual. Either and or both. Sorry, go ahead, Lois.
Right. Yeah, well, one of the things we're seeing with individual philanthropy is we have fewer households that are actually giving charitable gifts overall. Kind of over the last several years, we've kind of seen a decrease. Now, what's interesting is the amount of money that is given charitably has gone up, but we have fewer donors. So we have fewer donors, but the donors that are giving more, which is a good thing. The challenge, though, is that, we're going to see some pretty significant gaps. And I think even the private sector realizes, private sector meaning individuals or families, that there's no way they can make that up. I think the current statistic is in American households, only 2 to 3% of their disposable income is given to charitable causes. So that's a fairly small percentage. I suppose if American households on a private level wanted to give 5%, that would help considerably, but that's not where we're at. So, what I'm finding from donors is they're being kind of cautious right now. I think, if there are specific needs, they're rallying to them, but they're also being cautious because they don't quite know what the tax laws are going to do. They don't quite know what some of the other national policies are going to, what effect they're going to have on them. So they're responding, but they can't fill the gap.
Yeah. Emily, you represent a lot of different groups. Again, is that similar to what you're hearing from those folks?
Well, nobody's having an easy time getting the resources to do their work right now, that's for sure. I think there is so much uncertainty that it makes it really really difficult for nonprofits to know how long they're going to be able to keep payroll going and programs going and that kind of thing. And they need all the resources they can get their hands on to be able to meet the needs. Most of the nonprofits we talk to don't have the resources to meet the needs in whatever area they're serving, no matter what it may be. It's just not there. So I think that one of the beautiful things about nonprofits has always been that it's this mix of individual donors coming back together with churches, with corporate foundations, with government, and all of these things coming together to serve one goal. We're one of the only places where that happens. And all of those sectors are being impacted right now with uncertainty and with different changes that are putting those puzzle pieces together all the more difficult.
I don't think I'm saying anything that the people on the panel don't agree with, but it's really the importance for nonprofits for the diversification of revenue. You can't have your money all coming from one area. I do think for those nonprofits that rely more on smaller donations, I think that's probably going to be more of a struggle just because with all the uncertainty that's going on, people aren't quite, like Lois said, they're just holding back a little bit to see what's going to happen. I know we do a report and in which it's the ALICE families. It stands for Asset Limited Income. Income constrained, employed. And it's those people who are working but can't make ends meet. And in Iowa, it's 1 in every 3 people. And so if you think about that already, to Lois's point, you have a gap when it comes to who would be able to make a gift. And if someone can give $20 and that's the extent of their gift, are they going to be giving that, or are they going to be putting that toward food prices with inflation? And so I think there are those other types of pieces that nonprofits are really having to navigate right now.
Yeah. Excellent. I just wanted to pause real quick here as we're rolling through. Great discussion, exactly as I'd hoped. We're just a hair over halfway through. I wanted to remind those of you listening, in case you weren't on right from the start, that feel free to drop a question if you have one for one of our panelists. You can put that in the chat, and that'll get passed along to me, and we'll do our best to address those at some point before our time runs out here today. But wanted to make sure that everybody tuning in is aware that they can do that if you have a question for anyone or everyone in our group. So Kristen, let me dovetail right off of this, and Getsy, you touched on this a little bit earlier too, as we talk about these challenges. Now I'm curious to hear and again, Kristen, maybe have you start, since you just touched on this a little bit. Are there ways for organizations to, at least some degree, insulate themselves from the impacts of these swings and these moves between the quote unquote good times and the bad times? I acknowledging that there's no silver bullet for the big changes, but are there steps that organizations, nonprofits can take to at least mitigate some of that?
Yeah, I think of a couple things. One, I think from the political standpoint, we talked about earlier about just having the relationships, because when the swings do come, then you have those relationships to be able to explain the impact that it would have on your area. Again, these folks in our lawmaking positions, they rely on you to be the expert in the field, and they need the information from you. So having those relationships are important. I think back to just, having a strong organizational foundation, having the diversified revenue sources, having clear communication, having the ability to show your impact and the value that you bring to the organization or to the community that your organization has. Having those strong organizational infrastructures in place is what's going to allow people to move forward, hopefully be able to have a strong endowment, be able to have some reserves that they would be able to lean on in times that become rough. Those are the things that I think about kind of right off the bat.
Interesting.
Well, and I have to say, join the Nonprofit Alliance. There's always strength in numbers, and we're really able to help our members, first of all, stay on top of all the political changes happening at the state and federal level, which is very important right now, but also very difficult for resource and time constrained organizations. And we're doing that work for you. Also connecting you with peers and professional development opportunities and funding opportunities to help strengthen the entire sector.
You made me think another one, collaboration, right?
Yes, that is a big part of it. Yeah, I think the more we're united and together, and I'm glad you mentioned relationships, Kristen, because nothing's more important than that right now, is relationships with your lawmakers, with your community, with other organizations. That's a big place for all of us to think about spending more of our time.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Lois.
Well, I think too, with nonprofits specifically, but probably any business, a lot of people now are looking at what we call contingency plans or new business models. And so on one hand, it's pushing us all to be more innovative, to be to kind of think beyond our normal boundaries about, what could we do that's different? How could we fund things? How could we change programs? How could we collaborate with another organization and maybe do a piece of the service rather than the whole continuum of a service? So I think we really have to have some plans in our back pocket to think about, what are we going to do, and kind of prepare, as well as do as much building of relationships and networks as we can, so we can take advantage of any opportunities that present themselves down the road.
That's great. And Getsy, if I remember right, you touched on this a little bit earlier when you said Escucha Mi Voz is kind of has a diversified revenue is not the right word, but the funding sources that sort of insulates you from these big swings. Is that right?
Yeah, I think being a part of the big national networks is a huge help, but also having our members as the core and getting their input on these kinds of issues is also very important to us as well, because they are what drives our organization, and they are what, for the majority, what funds it. So it's really important for us to build those relationships, as everyone said, and continue building the connections with policymakers and people who have that stance.
No. Kristen and Emily, you both touched on this, and Emily, I'll maybe start with you because your organization is quite literally a collaboration. To what degree can collaboration help nonprofit organization, especially when things get challenging or money gets tight?
Yeah, we just had the Iowa Nonprofit Summit yesterday, and we had over 200 nonprofit leaders and staff from across the state come together. And this was a big topic because I think what we often see in Iowa, and someone yesterday referred to it as collaboration in name only. We talk about collaboration a lot, but I don't know if we really spend the time that it takes to do it well. And that is a mindset shift. We have had many, many years of philanthropy and government funding requiring an adherence to metrics and outcomes. And I think we've become so focused on that the time for building relationships and collaborating hasn't been there. And I think it's time to refocus on that, because in this environment where we need to be nimble and flexible and able to respond to challenges, the only way to get that done is to be able to really collaborate, which requires strong and trusting relationships, and all of that takes time.
Yeah, I think one of the, I'm so sorry, Lois, you can go ahead.
So go ahead.
I was just going to say, in Cedar Rapids, we're very blessed to have a wonderful collaborative network within the nonprofit community. We work extremely well with each other. We joke a little bit. We've been through so many disasters that it's kind of been forced upon us. But I can think particularly of an example called Patch, providing assistance to community homeowners, that happened after the Dre show. And you asked, how can you work together and make that happen? Patch was a group of private funders. It was the city, it was the county, I believe, it was the Greater Cedar Rapids Community Foundation, it was us, it was municipalities, government, it was funders, and we were able to come together and put money toward this opportunity and say, okay, where does this money come in first? You can bring in this money, we can bring in this money, we can fill this gap. And we were able to provide the ability for people to stay in their homes, whether they needed new roofs, mold, water mitigation, whatever it was. And we were able to help hundreds of people. And it was just this beautiful collaboration in which we're able to move forward. And our community has another one right now called the Alliance for Equitable Housing, in which, again, it's the same thing. It's municipalities, it's funders, it's nonprofit organizations, it's faith-based, all coming together, trying to figure out how we can make affordable housing and break down those barriers. So there are ways to do it. Is it a lot of work? Yes, it's a lot of work. Does there have to be a lot of trust? Yes, there has to be a lot of trust. But when we start to recognize this is what you're really good at, and this is the value you bring to our community, let's utilize you as we can, and we can come up alongside you and support you in this way. It's a beautiful thing to see happen.
The other thing I'd say is that, I think having open platforms is really important. Sometimes we get into competitive natures. The pie is only so big and everybody wants their piece. And I think the more we can share information and knowledge with each other, yes, that will help us be collaborative, but it helps learning too. It helps all of us get better at what we do. And I think, there's been a lot of studies done that when information is shared and we all bring something to the table, it can help everybody in the end. And I think the other thing with collaboration is I think we have to think outside of our network too, because sometimes we only collaborate with partners we know who work on kind of the same issue. But, maybe we need to collaborate with an organization that's entirely out of in another industry, because they may have some ideas or have something that they can bring to the table that we don't know about, and vice versa. So I think we just need to be very broad-minded about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think collaboration has always been really important to us, and it's a huge part of what we do. I mean, we collaborate with elected officials and churches and other organizations and so many different entities that it's crucial to build that trust and have that foundation of building those relationships from the very beginning, because that is a huge driving factor into allowing us to fulfill our mission in the community.
Yeah. Excellent. Appreciate that. We did get a question from one of our listeners. I'm going to go to that now, and it's actually perfect timing. And I tell you, great minds think alike. We have great Iowa Ideas listeners. This question is very similar to one that I was going to ask anyways. I had kind of a question about staff morale during challenging times, but I'm going to use this listener's question because I think it's even a little better. So our listener says, I'm mostly struggling with feeling exhausted and minimized by federal outcomes impacting our work. How do you all meet that resistance and pick yourself up to continue that work? A very heavy question, but an important one. And I'm curious to hear you guys' response to that too. For whoever would like to jump on that fun one first.
I mean, how I do it is a complicated mix of workouts and prescription medication, but it is something that I'm really worried about in the nonprofit sector, and something that at the Alliance we're really trying to think about the burnout across the state with our nonprofit employees is very real and very scary. And there's not really an end in sight. And so I think we have to come together and think about taking employee wellness very seriously. And I don't mean like, here's your gym membership. I mean the full holistic, physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, all of those different types of wellness. Nonprofit employees are often underpaid, overworked, and we need to really think seriously about how we treat the nonprofit workforce and how important their health and longevity is to our state.
Yeah, you mentioned, Emily, kind of that whole wellness aspect. I think having EAP programs, employee assistance programs, is really helpful if organizations can afford that. I think finding support networks outside of your own organization, maybe those are friends, maybe they're relatives, maybe I know our community foundation has peer groups where individuals get together and support each other and share and help. But unfortunately, I mean, some statistics I've seen are as much as 40 to 50% of people in nonprofit leaders planning to leave the field in the next 2 to 3 years, because I think people are kind of tired of making do, always adjusting. But the sector is going to continue. I mean, we will survive. We always survive. So it's really, I think, a matter of supporting each other as much as we can. And, hopefully our boards of directors and our donors come up and support us too.
You made me think of something that came into my inbox today, and I just pulled it up, and it said reciprocity. Our biggest commitments, the things we are most dedicated to, rarely pay us back in equal measure. That might be the point. Now, do I feel like that definitely helps you feel better at the end of the day? No, because I do think the burnout is real, but sometimes it's just finding that one little win. And I know sometimes that sounds so pie in the sky, kumbaya, whatever it is, but you do have to find that one piece along the way to keep you going. However, I agree with what Lois and Emily said. The burnout rate is somewhat scary. I also would say not only burnout rate, but pay rates, right? Being able to afford living as the way the inflation continues to grow. As you mentioned, Emily, nonprofits consistently pay some of the lowest wages. And how can we change that mindset that it's okay, we pay our nonprofit employees less just because they get a good feeling at the end of the day. They still have to pay for car insurance. They still have to pay for groceries. They still have to pay for their kid to go to college if that's what they choose. And we need to find a way to be able to balance that better.
That ties into the advocacy issue too. And Emily, I know you representing an association in a sense. I think we have to advocate for the sector because I think there is a mentality among the general public that, yes, it's a nonprofit. You're not going to earn as much. That's okay. You're doing this because you love it. And we all do. But the reality is we need livable wages. We can't hire employees if we can't be competitive. And we deal with the same issues they do in the for-profit sector, which is, a lot of pressure these days to deliver on our services and goods and products.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I can add kind of a personal story to that, but going into working in nonprofit straight after undergrad, and I was a little bit nervous because I knew that burnout rate was super high, and I was like, I don't know how I'm going to do it because I'm also a full-time graduate student. Mm-hmm. So I was nervous going into it, but I think the biggest thing that has made a difference in being able to take on this work is having a supportive team. Having a supportive team with whom I can collaborate with and who are constantly, we're always checking in on each other. We're always, if it's visible that one of us needs a break, we encourage each other to take a break and step back. And I think that's made the biggest difference, is having a supportive team that you can trust and you can, that you can lean back on when you need to.
Yeah, That's good stuff. I appreciate you all sharing that. And look, I'm not trying to compare myself to anyone, but I work in an industry in the private sector that's had its struggles recently, so I can empathize to a degree. So it's great to hear kind of the ways that you all approach those challenges. Has been down those roads to a certain degree myself. One last reminder I want to just throw out real quick. I'm looking at the clock and we got about 10 minutes left here. And so time for a couple of quick questions. And so if anybody listening wanted to sneak a question in, now is the time before that clock hits us. Again, drop a note in the chat if you'd like to ask a question for any of our panelists. I want to kind of take another step back here again, and Emily, maybe I'll start with you on this one. Based on everything we've talked about today and your experiences in this sector and with all the groups that you talk to, and you may get this exact question, Emily, even if a nonprofit leader or group came to you and said, what advice do you have about navigating some of these things that we talked about today, whether it's political challenges, funding challenges, staff morale? What's some of the best advice that you've either heard or shared with nonprofit leaders trying to navigate the various issues that they face these days?
I mean, that's so difficult. I think that right now, the best thing we can do is focus on what's right in front of us and trying to stay grounded in that and not caught up in everything that happens day to day, if at all possible. Like I said, focus on relationships. Is your team spending enough time together to have those strong relationships? Have you looked at your metrics and figured out if those are realistic in this current environment? Where can we back off of that focus on outcomes and numbers and look at just how we respond to the world that we're in and focus on relationships? That requires the cooperation of our philanthropic partners to some extent. I think those in the funder community need to really be thinking about changing their approaches to match the moment as well. This might not be the time for the theory of change and reporting every outcome survey. This might be the time for asking your nonprofits how they're doing and just how you can support them as people in this moment. We kind of went straight from pandemic where, nonprofits were on the front lines into a lot of the other just sort of political upheaval and other things that we're on the front lines of again. So we just need to think about different approaches and how can we simplify things and really focus on what's most important.
Very good. And Lois, maybe I'll come to you next because, again, as a consultant, maybe you get this exact kind of question. People looking for your sage counsel.
Sure. Well, I think, because we are in such a changeable environment and an unpredictable environment, I think, as been mentioned earlier, I think people really need to look at diversification in terms of their funding source and trying to build some strategy in terms of where else can I look for resources? Not only how can I fine tune what I do and get very clear about what are the non-negotiables? What are the things that I really have to hang on to and want to hang on to provide services in the community? But then where else can I find resources? And sometimes you need outside help for that. Sometimes, you can do that with your board and colleagues. I think people, really should be thinking very seriously about moving their reliance on government funding away from it. I don't think it's going to change much in the next couple of years. And so I think people really need to look at different business models that give them more diversity and plan ahead, know what the trends are, watch what's out there. Because the more we can be proactive rather than reactive, I think the better off you're going to be.
Excellent. Getsy, how about you? What are some of the lessons you've learned that you would think would be great to share with other nonprofit leaders?
Yeah, I think definitely just encourage members to get involved and kind of educate them on how the nonprofit world works. I think they are a resource that can get overlooked sometimes and how they can support you during setbacks. But I mean, yeah, members are at the core of what we do. So encourage them to contribute in some way that will help the organization grow and thrive.
Excellent. And Kristen, anything to add there?
Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said. The one thing I would just say is leaders of nonprofits, make sure you take care of yourself. So often it is easy to put everybody first and you just keep moving and going and working all the hours and replying to just one more email before you shut it off at night. But there does have to be some sort of, if you take Emily's way of doing workouts and medication and whatever it is, being able to find the ways that work for you to be able to take care of yourself. Because if you're not good, your team's not going to be good.
That's such a great point. I appreciate you mentioned that. We talked and I asked earlier about, and our listener asked about staff morale, but just as important for folks like yourselves, the leaders of all these groups. That's a great point. Thanks, Kristen. All right, we're in our last 5 minutes, so this is a perfect time. First of all, to thank everybody for listening who tuned in, and thank you again to our experts here, panelists. This has been I thought it was going to be a great discussion. It has been. I appreciate y'all so much. I wanted to leave. I told these folks I want to leave a little bit of time at the end for any closing thoughts they may have to drive home something we talked about, or maybe something that we didn't get to that they want to make sure that we highlight. So again, we'll go around the horn one last time. And Emily, we'll start with you. Offer any closing thoughts you might have for us.
Well, mine's easy. Join the Nonprofit Alliance if you're not already a member. And if you're in the philanthropic community, you can also join and you can support us in different ways. We're trying to make it as a nonprofit just like everybody else with a mix of our members and other resources. But beyond that, I would say just that message of trying to focus on what's in front of you and what the next right step is, and trying not to get too overwhelmed with everything that's happening, because I think when we do that, we miss what's right there that we could be impacting.
I'll always be recruiting. Well done, Emily. Lois, get your closing thoughts next.
Well, I think the nonprofit sector is going to continue to exist and will continue to do great work. I don't think we're going to go away no matter how challenging things get. I think we do need to reach out to our colleagues. I think we need to use our volunteers. We all have great board members, and Getsy, as you mentioned, I think we need to ask the people that we serve their ideas, because they may have some solutions for us too. And just be as creative as you possibly can, and advocate, educate people about what we do and what the impact of all these changes are going to be, because I think unfortunately down the road we'll be surprised when some of the services that we treasure maybe can't be available anymore. But we're a resilient group and we're going to survive.
Thanks for that, Lois. Getsy, how about you? What are your closing thoughts here today?
I think definitely just encouraging anybody that's listening who maybe isn't as involved in nonprofit work, or, maybe just find a nonprofit in your area that does work or is connected to a cause that you care about, and, get involved, support them, become a member, donate, volunteer your time, or even just show up to their events. I think all contributions are meaningful in nonprofits, and I mean, nonprofits are critical to our communities. So I think that's what I would leave people with.
Excellent. Appreciate it. And Kristen, last but definitely not least, give us your closing thoughts.
Yeah, okay, so I'm going to go out on a limb here. I may sound a little kumbaya-ish, but I think the one thing that I've learned is we're talking about advocacy with nonprofits. When you sit down with people, everyone I have found does have one common thing. They all want what's best for Iowa. They all firmly believe in our state. They love where we live. How that happens is where the differences come in. And I think if we can just continue to go back to that one piece as to we're all here to make where we live a really good place, try to not focus on how we get there or how it's gone about, but at least when those struggles do come up, making sure that we understand and not othering people, being able to understand that there is that common good. Again, I understand that how we get there is going to be different, but if you can always go back to that, you hopefully will be able to find some sort of a commonality with people and be able to move the conversation forward.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Kristen, and I'll just put a bow on that because I feel like that gets back at some of those early questions we talked about, and that there's challenges and there's differences of opinion out there, but on a lot of the work that you all do, there's very much common ground, like Kristen said, that people sometimes have different ideas about the right way, but if you talk about, do you think this is important in our mission, and you're going to find the vast majority of people do. So it's how do we get through to that? So that's why we wanted this discussion today, and I appreciate everybody's input so much. We're up against the clock. Thank you so much to all of our panelists for taking your time today to provide your valuable expertise and insight. We appreciate it so much. Lois, Kristen, Emily, Getsy, thank you very, very much for your input today. And thank you to all the attendees who listened in. We're so happy you joined us. Please check out the Iowa Ideas schedule, iowaideas.com. A few more sessions yet today and a full day of events sessions tomorrow as well. A couple keynote addresses. So make sure you check us out. And lastly, thanks again to our major sponsors, our presenting sponsor, ITC Midwest, and our Human and Social Services track sponsor, Four Oaks Family and Children's Service. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.